There are moments in Hollywood that don't happen on camera. They happen between the glances, in the silences, in the spaces where truth and memory collide. When Al Pacino stood on that stage at the American Film Institute to honor Diane Keaton, his voice trembled, not from age, but from something far heavier. It wasn't just admiration. It was remembrance. It was guilt. And maybe it was love. He looked out at the crowd and said 6 quiet words that carried decades of meaning. You're an artist. A great artist. But behind that simple sentence hid an entire history, a story Hollywood never wanted to tell. Because behind the glamorous lights and award speeches, there's a silent war that has always existed between the system and those who refuse to bow to it. Diane Keaton wasn't just another actress. She was an earthquake disguised as a smile, a woman who refused to play by the rules of a game built to contain her. And Al Pacino? He was the one man who saw it all, from the moment they met in a small Italian restaurant in East Harlem, surrounded by legends like Marlon Brando, to the quiet years when Hollywood turned cold, and she stood her ground alone. What began as a friendship between 2 artists became something much deeper, a shared rebellion against the machine that made them famous. Because while the world saw brilliance, the industry saw danger. And what Pacino said that night wasn't just a tribute, it was a confession. This is the story of how Hollywood tried to silence Diane Keaton, and why Al Pacino still refuses to let it die. It didn't happen on a movie set or a red carpet. It happened in a small Italian restaurant in East Harlem, a place called Patsy's, where the cast of The Godfather gathered for their very first dinner together. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, laughter, and the quiet pressure of greatness. Around the table sat giants: Marlon Brando, Francis Ford Coppola, James Caan, and a young, nervous Al Pacino, still uncertain if he belonged among them. And then there was Diane Keaton. She wasn't the most famous name at the table. Not yet. She was the newcomer, eccentric, sharp, and unfiltered, the kind of person who didn't just enter a room. She changed its temperature. And when the legendary Marlon Brando leaned over, extended his hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Marlon Brando," she didn't swoon like everyone expected. She looked him straight in the eye, shrugged, and said, "Yeah, right. Okay, good, that's fine." The room froze for half a second. You could almost hear the disbelief. Who talks to Marlon Brando like that? But Pacino noticed something different, something magnetic. In that single exchange, Keaton did what no one in that room dared to do. She broke the invisible rule that kept actors in their place. That moment wasn't arrogance. It was authenticity. It was the quiet rebellion of a woman who would never play by Hollywood's unspoken hierarchy. Not then, not ever. While others spent years trying to fit in, Keaton showed up as herself from day one, unpredictable, playful, and completely uninterested in power. Pacino never forgot it. That spark of defiance, that subtle smirk that said she didn't need permission to exist. Because what looked like a small moment of humor in East Harlem was actually the beginning of something much bigger, a friendship that would survive fame, failure, and the quiet war between art and control. And soon, that friendship would be tested. Because when Hollywood turned its back on Pacino, it was Diane who stood between him and the system, even when it meant putting her own career on the line. But that wasn't the whole story. It was only the beginning of a battle that would change both of their lives forever. When filming began for The Godfather, not everyone in Hollywood believed in Al Pacino. To the studio executives at Paramount, he was a nobody, too quiet, too short, too strange for a film that demanded power and charisma. They wanted someone safer, someone who looked like the typical leading man. Behind the glass doors of corporate meetings, they called him a risk. Some even pushed to have him replaced before the cameras finished rolling, but not everyone saw a risk. Diane Keaton saw genius. She watched him work in silence, taking long pauses between lines, studying every gesture, as if the whole world depended on it. While the executives whispered about replacing him, Diane whispered encouragement. She knew what the others didn't, that the stillness in Pacino wasn't weakness. It was control. It was power waiting to erupt. And when Paramount tried to pull the plug, it was Keaton who spoke up to Coppola. She warned him, they're going to fire him. Coppola, desperate to prove them wrong, shot the now legendary restaurant scene, the one where Michael Corleone sits calmly before his enemies, then kills them both in cold blood. It was the scene that saved Pacino's career and secured his place in history. Diane had been right all along, but her loyalty came at a price. In the Hollywood of the 1970s, supporting the wrong person could destroy you. Keaton didn't care. She wasn't loyal to power. She was loyal to truth. And that terrified people. In an industry built on alliances and silent obedience, a woman defending a risky actor looked like rebellion. Studio insiders started calling her unpredictable. Publicists warned she was too emotional. But beneath those coded words was a simpler truth. She couldn't be controlled. Pacino never forgot that. Long before the world praised him as one of the greatest actors of all time, Diane Keaton was the one person who believed in him without hesitation. She didn't play politics. She protected art. And that bond, that quiet, defiant loyalty, would shape both of their fates. Because Hollywood doesn't forgive rebellion. And for Diane Keaton, her defense of Pacino was only the first act in a long war against the machine that tried to define her. But the real fight was only beginning. Diane Keaton never stormed out of a studio. She never ranted to the press. She never wrote a manifesto. Her rebellion was quieter and more dangerous. While other actresses polished their image to fit the Hollywood mold, Diane rewrote the script. She wore oversized men's blazers when everyone else wore designer gowns. She answered interview questions with unfiltered honesty while others rehearsed smiles. She walked into auditions without makeup, not to make a statement, but because she simply didn't care to pretend, and that terrified the industry. Executives called her difficult. Directors said she was hard to read. Publicists whispered that she didn't play the game, but none of those labels were about her attitude. They were about her independence. Because Hollywood doesn't just sell beauty, it sells obedience. And Keaton didn't come to be shaped. She came to create. She didn't attend every party. She didn't date for headlines. She didn't flatter people she didn't respect. And in a business where relationships are currency, that meant one thing. She was going to pay a price. While her peers learned to survive by conforming, Diane thrived by staying unpredictable. She wasn't mysterious in the way Hollywood liked, with carefully crafted mystique and red carpet charm. She was mysterious because she didn't care whether they understood her at all. That scared people. Because when a woman refuses to ask for permission, the system labels her a problem. But Diane didn't care. She didn't need to play by their rules because she'd already started rewriting them. And as her presence grew, so did the tension. Because Hollywood wanted to love her, but only if she played along. And she never would. Next came the role that changed everything, and the outfit that accidentally started a revolution. When Annie Hall hit theaters in 1977, it didn't just redefine romantic comedies. It redefined Diane Keaton. But the truth? She didn't reinvent herself. Hollywood just finally caught up. The woman the world fell in love with in Annie Hall, the slouchy vests, oversized ties, nervous charm, and fearless vulnerability. That wasn't a character. That was Diane. Those weren't costume pieces curated by a studio stylist. Those were her actual clothes. Ralph Lauren may have received credit for the Annie Hall look, but Keaton later revealed the truth. She brought that wardrobe from her own closet. And in doing so, she turned fashion into rebellion, not with shock, but with subtlety. While other actresses were sculpted to fit someone else's fantasy, Keaton was just herself. And that, ironically, made her a star. She didn't perform individuality. She embodied it. Every awkward pause in the dialogue, every unfinished sentence, every sideways glance, it wasn't scripted. It was Diane's rhythm, her way of disarming the audience by simply being real. And yet, behind the applause and awards, Hollywood's discomfort still lingered. They adored the performance, but they still didn't know what to do with the woman behind it. Was she eccentric or genius? Was she fragile or fierce? Was her authenticity a brand? Or a threat? As the world praised her for revolutionizing female leads, the same gatekeepers who once dismissed her began to fear her power. Because Keaton proved something they didn't want to admit. You didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to be polished. You just had to be true. And truth, in Hollywood, is rarely convenient. So while Diane's face became iconic, her spirit remained uncontainable. And just when they thought they had figured her out, she broke every rule again. Because her next act wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. In a town that fears time like a curse, Diane Keaton made it her companion. While others quietly disappeared or fought age with surgeons in silence, Diane did the unthinkable. She embraced it. She didn't freeze her face. She didn't dye her hair. She didn't chase youth. She showed up. Wrinkles, gray strands, eccentric hats and all, laughing, confident, and unbothered. In an industry where women are often discarded after 40, Diane Keaton didn't just survive. She evolved. But make no mistake, Hollywood didn't reward her for it. They didn't applaud her courage or hand her roles for her honesty. They quietly moved her to the sidelines, unsure of what to do with a woman who aged without apology. Executives wanted her image, the quirky older woman with sharp wit and strange style, but not her mind, not her power. And yet, Diane kept working on her terms. She directed, she wrote, she photographed, she raised children. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She created her own path beside it. While her peers tried to stay relevant by transforming themselves, Diane stayed relevant by staying real. And that made her more dangerous than ever. Because when a woman refuses to erase herself to be seen, she becomes impossible to ignore. She spoke openly about aging, not as a tragedy, but as a process, something natural, something freeing. She said she didn't want to look frozen in time. She didn't need to pretend she was 30. She just needed to be Diane. In a world built on illusion, her reality became radical. And behind the scenes, that scared the system even more, because Diane Keaton wasn't fading. She was sharpening. And only one man in Hollywood truly understood that, the same man she defended decades earlier. And when he spoke up, the world finally listened. Al Pacino has never been one to speak just to be heard. He's a man of pauses, of thought, of slow-burning truth. So when he stood before a room full of Hollywood elites at the American Film Institute to honor Diane Keaton, his words didn't sound like a speech. They sounded like a reckoning. You're an artist. A great artist. That was it. No over-the-top flattery. No rehearsed anecdotes. Just truth, raw, quiet, and heavy. It wasn't just praise. It was a correction. Because for years, Diane Keaton had been misread, mislabeled, and misunderstood by the very system that once put her on a pedestal. While Hollywood called her difficult, Pacino called her brilliant. While insiders labeled her eccentric, he saw clarity. And while others forgot her, he never did. Their bond had always defied the spotlight. No tabloid drama. No public fallouts. Just decades of mutual understanding between two artists who never bent to the rules. But the truth is, their paths were never judged equally. Pacino's silence was seen as mystery, genius. Keaton's silence was seen as aloof, problematic. He was a legend. She was an outlier. Same depth, same solitude, different consequences. And that's why Pacino's tribute mattered so deeply. Because in a single sentence, he shattered decades of quiet judgment. He reclaimed Diane Keaton from the myths that tried to reduce her. Their friendship wasn't built on performance. It was built on shared resistance, a mutual refusal to sell out, to soften, to obey. And Pacino knew exactly what the industry had done to her. He had watched her be pushed aside, not because she lacked talent, but because she had too much control. Because she didn't need Hollywood to validate her. And that made her dangerous. So when Pacino honored her, it wasn't sentiment. It was justice. A final act of loyalty in a town where loyalty rarely survives. But what Hollywood didn't expect was that Keaton's quiet rebellion was already reshaping the future. In Hollywood, authenticity is praised publicly, but punished privately. And no one felt that more deeply than Diane Keaton. She wasn't scandalous. She wasn't reckless. She was something far more threatening, uncompromising. Keaton didn't play the game, and that made her unmanageable. She didn't chase press. She didn't seduce executives. She didn't trade vulnerability for visibility. And in an industry built on performance, both on screen and off, that meant only one thing. She was no longer invited to the inner circle. She didn't fade because her talent declined. She faded because the system didn't know how to profit from someone it couldn't predict. While younger actresses followed trends, aligned with movements, and rebranded to survive, Diane simply continued. Being Diane, she raised children on her own. She directed quiet films that didn't chase box office numbers. She published memoirs that explored emotion without exploiting it. She had influence, but not the kind the industry could monetize. She had power, but not the kind the machine could control. And that's why they called her difficult. It was a code word. It didn't mean rude. It meant independent. Yet outside the boardrooms, her legacy only grew. Actresses like Greta Gerwig, Emma Stone, and Saoirse Ronan wore suits on red carpets and leaned into their quirks, and every one of them, knowingly or not, walked a path Diane Keaton cleared, because while Hollywood sidelined her, it couldn't silence her. Her influence didn't scream, it whispered. It lived in every performance that embraced awkwardness as power, in every costume that broke rules, in every woman who dared to be seen as more than decoration. Diane Keaton paid the price for being real. But in doing so, she gave generations permission to do the same. And in a town built on illusion, her truth became the loudest rebellion of all. Diane Keaton never asked for Hollywood's approval. And maybe that's why she's still standing. Not as a legend manufactured by studios, but as a legacy carved from resistance. In her later years, she didn't chase blockbusters. She chose stories that felt human, flawed, quiet. Something's Gotta Give, Book Club, Morning Glory. Films that dared to place older women in the center, not as caricatures, but as complex, desirable, hilarious beings. And the irony? The same industry that once dismissed her for being too strange now sells her image as endearing. The quirky grandma, the wise misfit. But what they still don't understand is Diane Keaton never became those things. She always was. She didn't wait for the world to accept her. She built a world that had no choice but to follow. And while others curated their online personas for fame, Diane used social media like a scrapbook, sharing photos of architecture, laughing at herself in old hats, embracing the mess. No polish, no filter, no performance. Just life, raw and unedited. Even now, She remains a mystery that Hollywood can't solve. Not because she's hiding, but because she never needed to explain herself to begin with. Al Pacino knew that. He always did. When he stood before that crowd, decades after their first dinner in East Harlem, his tribute wasn't just a celebration. It was a correction, a reminder, a warning that the woman Hollywood once tried to forget had never really left. She was still there, hat tilted, eyes sharp, spirit unbroken, not waiting for recognition, but proving, simply by existing, that some legacies can't be edited, sold, or erased. Diane Keaton didn't just survive the system. She outlived its expectations, and in doing so, she became something far more powerful than a star. She became the standard.